In the spirit of peace and cooperation, both leaders also agreed that Bahrain will fully normalize its diplomatic relations with Israel. They will exchange embassies and ambassadors, begin direct flights between their countries, and launch cooperation initiatives across a broad range of sectors. I am very hopeful that there will be more to follow. I can tell you there's tremendous enthusiasm on behalf of other countries to also join.
President today, on this, the 19th anniversary of 9/11, the Middle East obviously spawned those 9/11 hijackers. The Middle East today looks a lot different with the announcement today of a Israel-Bahrain deal, a peace deal that normalizes relations. This after the Israel-UAE deal. Let's start there with our panel. Kimberly Strassel, a member of the editorial board at the Wall Street Journal, Leslie Marshall, Democratic strategist, and Ben Domenech, publisher at The Federalist. Ben, you know, there's so much happening day to day that something like this, two big peace deals between Israel and Arab countries, shouldn't be overlooked. They're going to have a big ceremony, but it's a really big deal.
This is a massive deal. It's hugely important. It's a good thing for the world and for the Middle East, for Israel and for the Arab states. And it's a huge accomplishment and vindication of the approach that the Trump administration has used. They get too little credit for this, I think, because of all the different domestic focuses that we've had. But however many lengthy open letters are signed by the displaced foreign policy establishment that didn't dream big enough to try to achieve these things in the past, I think that we have to give them credit for what they've been able to achieve and reach for the good of our country and security in the region.
Leslie?
Well, look, it may be a good deal for Israel, it may be a good deal for the Arabs, but it's not a good deal for the Palestinians. The Palestinians were not at the table. And even though you have Arabs and some media sources saying that that Netanyahu isn't going to continue to rebuild into the settlements, you know, he said right after this deal was cut, I'm not going to stop rebuilding in the settlements. So it might look very good for the UAE, maybe it looks very good for Netanyahu supporters and some, if not many, in Israel, but certainly not for the Palestinians in the Palestinian territory who really feel that they didn't get a good deal out of this deal that's being applauded.
Well, Kimberly, the president's teasing that there may be more deals ahead.
Well, this is a recognition, Brett, among a lot of Arab countries that the dynamic has shifted in the region. I mean, and not to take anything away at all from the Trump administration, they do get credit for putting these together, but it's partly been motivated by this new awareness that of the regional threat from Iran and the need to look around and come up with different alliances and hedge against that threat. So I wouldn't be surprised to see more people come along. We now have 4 countries that have normalized relations with Israel in the region, and I bet you're going to see that number grow.
Yeah, Egypt, Jordan, UAE, and now Bahrain. Okay, let's talk Joe Biden and NAFTA. Take a listen.
Something else he did is he renegotiated NAFTA.
He did.
Does he deserve credit for that?
No, I think, remember, he wasn't the one that pushed that particular one that passed.
He renegotiated NAFTA and you didn't, is the point. I mean,
because we had a Republican Congress that wouldn't go along with us renegotiating it.
But doesn't he deserve some credit for that? It's better. The USMCA is better than NAFTA.
It is better than NAFTA.
Joe Biden saying that he had a Republican Congress, just to point out that when Joe Biden came into office as vice president, he didn't. The Senate was 57 to 41, and the House was 257 to 178, Democrats controlling both. Now, NAFTA obviously wasn't a priority for the incoming administration, but to say he had a Republican Congress and that was the reason, that's wrong. Ben, how does this play in the Rust Belt?
I think that this is going to be something that the president leans into on the trail. You're seeing these increasing questions, I think, for Joe Biden. He's not been well served by avoiding them to this point, treated with kid gloves by many in the press. And when he responds to these, he seems to be all over the map. And frequently he has this difficulty of voting for something and then turning against it, just like with the Iraq War. I think you're going to see the president lean into this a lot more as he started to in Michigan this week.
What about that, Leslie? I mean, obviously the Bernie Sanders side of the party doesn't like this whole talk about NAFTA.
Oh, obviously. I mean, Senator Sanders said, look, I was against TPP. You know, I was, prior to him not becoming the nominee, I was against NAFTA. I'm one of those Democrats who was against NAFTA, even though I was a Bill Clinton supporter, voted for him twice. There were jobs that were gained over 100,000. But look, that doesn't offset the problem with wages. That doesn't offset the trade deficit that we still have. I think Joe Biden has a lot of explaining to do to, I'm sorry?
Is this a vulnerability, I guess, is the question.
Absolutely, absolutely. Look at 2016. I mean, Brett, that Hillary Clinton, it wasn't only not visiting, it wasn't policies that were resonating with the blue-collar, working middle class. And that is an area that Joe Biden and Democrats have to definitely appease to get them to not vote for President Trump again in 2020, as they did in 2016.
Kimberly?
Yeah, this is a double whammy for Joe Biden because, as was just mentioned, you mentioned the Rust Belt. You go out there to Pennsylvania to these manufacturing towns that look like ghost towns, and the voters there are the people that heard Donald Trump talking about the need to renegotiate trade deals. They blame NAFTA and trade deals for the decline that they have seen in their regions, and that was the margin of error that put him over the victory line. So not only do you have Joe Biden, he voted for it, but then you have the knowledge that he promised to fix it and never did. And like you said, totally had the opportunity. There were many things for political reasons that the Obama administration pushed aside, even though they had a filibuster-proof majority in the Senate for a while, and that included another one, immigration. So this is something that I think is going to be hard for him to explain away to a lot of voters.
All right, so we didn't have time for winners and losers, but your winners, Kim's was the Western firefighters, Leslie's 9/11 first responders, Ben, President Trump, and foreign policy. Panel, thank you. Have a great weekend.